everyone. Welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a channel dedicated to supporting the adult survivors among us who have experienced some form of child sexual abuse. Hello and welcome. So excited to have some new followers joining us today, and grateful for all you beautiful souls out there, because as we know, this is a subject that is not often encouraged. Whereas at Handing the Shame Back, we do nothing but talk about it. So we do have a wonderful guest for you, but before I introduce him, I need to issue a trigger warning. Some of the content by its very nature could be upsetting. So the reason that we talk about this and the history of the guests involved is because one of you, even one of you, may just hear something that is said and think, oh, that sounds like me. So we're just trying to share with love and humility. Okay, so if you do get triggered, please stop watching, go to the show notes below, and you'll be guided to some resource and support. In the meantime, I'm really honoured to bring our guest to you today. His name is Kane Brisco. He's a dad, he's a husband, he's a farmer, he's a survivor. He's here in New Zealand, and welcome to the show, Kane.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll end up going down lots of different paths, because that's the nature of what happens with this. So I'm sure we're going to have a really enjoyable interview. So, Kane, are you able to share just as little or as much as you want about your own history as a child, please, of the child sexual abuse you went through?
Yeah, um, yes, I had a really good upbringing. I was brought up in town, but I had two older brothers that were half brothers, so they're quite a bit older than me, 10 and 12 years, I think, or 11 and 13, something like that. And I was lucky, or we were all lucky enough to be able to go out to my uncle's farm, dairy farm, and we all loved the farming lifestyle. I guess we got shipped out there for school holidays and weekends, and really enjoyed that. Um, I guess the background of this is my uncle didn't have any of his own kids, but he was a mentor to all of us, and a mentor to others as well. So there's one particular, it wasn't unusual to have, different families out there, and different kids out there working on the farm, and just trying to, townies basically understanding the rural life. And one of these particular boys was, I don't know how old he was, but he was a regular out on the farm, so we all knew who he was, and interacted with him. And he was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years older than me. And we all got along fine, and I don't really remember too much about how it started, but I was around the ages of 8 or 9, so still quite young. And I guess he more often we were out there together alone. At that stage, both of my brothers had left school and moved out of home and had their own farming jobs, so they were sort of scattered around. So often it was me going out to the farm on my own, and quite often this older boy would be here too, and we'd work and play, and got along great. But at some point, it turned into, how would I describe it? I guess uh, the play turned into, I guess, a more sexual um, type thing, and he, I guess, coerced me into, over time, sexual favors, and that sort of thing. And I do remember like refusing at the start, and it was met with do it or else, basically. So physical threats of physical violence. And I was a small boy. I was pretty shy, and he was quite a big boy. So whether he was 14 or 15 or something like that, and I was 8 or 9. So obviously quite a big difference at that age. And to be honest, I don't even really at that age I didn't even really know what was going on. It felt wrong, but um, yeah, I was none the wiser. It was before the days of the internet and YouTube and all those websites and that sort of thing. So I didn't really know what was going on. And in the end, I guess became compliant. Um, I still remember trying to, I remember running away from him sometimes, and doing my best to get out of it. But yeah, probably over the course of 6 months to a year, um, it occurred. I don't know, half a dozen times maybe. But it was strange too, because I still wanted him to be my friend. So I would actually go and hang out with them, hoping that we could get up to adventures and that sort of thing. But in the end, it started every time turning into um, this abuse. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's, I think, I can't remember. It just stopped being a thing that I'd go out to the farm. I think I distanced myself from going out there a bit, and I think mustn't have been too much longer after that. He probably left school and stopped going out there as well, perhaps. I don't actually know what caused the end, but I think I'd just had enough, and I stopped willingly going to hang out with him. And yeah, it was getting. I guess the abuse was getting more, a little bit more heavy and disturbing, I
Yeah.
guess, is the best way I could probably describe it.
Well, thank you. And already you've raised some valuable points. You know, interestingly, that initially within the grooming, because he was grooming you,
Mm,
and targeting you. So these guys know what they're doing. But interesting that when the grooming was enough to get you to spend time with him, once you tried to resist, then emerged that, the threats.
yep.
And this is it's often what our beautiful survivors watching experience as well, Kane, which is there is no choice in there. You're very small. If I showed you an image of you as an 8-year-old and a big 14, 15-year-old,
Mm,
there's just no way you have any power.
no, no, and that for years and years I felt so guilty and ashamed that I didn't fight, and because I would consider myself a fighter now, and that was one of the consequences. I actually became a fighter.
Yeah,
Um, and I look back, and I guess probably over the last few years realized that um, I'm judging my 8-year-old self on what I am today.
yes,
And that's really hard, because when I think back to how, what I was like as an 8 or 9-year-old boy, I was very shy, I was very small, skinny. Um, so I try to look back now with a bit of kindness and understanding, I think, and that's taken 25 years to figure that out, more or less.
yeah.
It's really hard carrying that shame and guilt of thinking you should have done more, or but at the end of the day, you do what you do to survive, I guess, and get through it. And yeah, it was bloody hard.
Well, and again, another golden nugget, thank you, is from you. We know that the shame is huge and it threatens to keep us quiet for the rest of our lives. And you'll know survivors, as I do, who can never speak easily of this. We very rarely look at the guilt aspect of it.
Mm,
And I think it's a worthwhile point, Kane, because as children, and looking at that self-compassion you now have, as children, we think we have more power or autonomy than we actually do. And the guilt that exists in some of us now, I just wonder where you think that may come from.
Yeah, I don't know. I've tried to figure out the guilt thing. The only thing I can really think of, well, for me personally, so I guess in terms of my environment around me, I had two older brothers. They were, I would say, they were quite tough guys. They're quite rebellious and big and strong. Um, and they were 10 plus years older than me, so they were out in the big wide world. They played footy and got in fights, and they were that typical tough Kiwi sort of young adult. My uncle, who was a mentor to all of us, here's your absolute typical Kiwi farmer. Very tough man, strong. Um, but a great human nonetheless. But just that stoic, and the same with my dad. Really, he was a stoic, tough guy. Um, so I had, I guess, this environment around me, and I guess I thought they wouldn't let that happen to them. And I thought, but I've let this happen to me. So I felt, you know, one of the things I felt was just too ashamed that hadn't been strong enough to fight them off, or um, do something like that. And I thought if I told my brothers or something, that they'd think I was a bloody weak and a pussy, or whatever label you want to throw at it. So that was, for me, that was that stigma around it, that I didn't think I was a man, a male, because that's what my role models were. They were tough, and they would fight if they got attacked, whereas I didn't, or I couldn't, whatever it was. Yeah,
And
so
that, I think that's a really good way of explaining it, because you're a dad now yourself. Do you,
mm.
so when you think about, I don't know how old your children are, Kane, and you don't have to discuss, if you,
Yeah, or if one of them's about the same age that I was, so that's a real. When I think about it now, I'm like, yeah, no wonder, because she's like, my daughter's the same age, and my son's a little bit younger. They don't have a shit show.
no,
No offense to them, but and I think back to me at that age, and I'm like, wow, that was a lot to go through.
yeah,
Yeah, and as a dad, you're like, my mindset back then of being ashamed and guilty. As a dad now, I'm just like, oh, that's just the complete opposite. Yeah, yeah, a lot of it was I took the blame for what someone else fucking did to me, and I'm like,
yeah,
what was I thinking? I
yeah,
guess. But that's what you do as a kid. You
yeah,
don't know any better. So that. That's taken a long, long time to work through, and figure out.
yeah.
And yeah, I didn't forgive myself for most of my life, which was, it's just not the way it should be.
How is it now? Have you been able to?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's still, in some ways, I still look back and regret that. Fuck, wish I grabbed a knife or something and fucking really went at it. But you know, I did the best with what I knew at the time, and that's all anyone can do. So I've been able to, for most of my life, I thought forgiveness was about forgiving him, but it was about forgiving myself. So that's a fairly recent revelation. I'm 36 now, so it took a
Congratulations.
long, long time. Yeah,
It's
thank you.
it's a it's a really hard one, and I think it's quite powerful for our audience watching as well, because the guilt that exists within some of our wonderful audience to this day. And yet I learned this little tip, Kane, and if you think about it, I think you'd like it. If your best friend was telling you this story, What would your words be to them?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wouldn't be shame or guilt or any of those, would it? It'd be comfort and empathy, and that's a
Passion.
bloody, yeah. It's a great perspective to have, isn't it? And um, yeah, I wish I figured that out earlier.
Yeah. Hey, in hindsight, we know everything, just in case.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
But
right.
I also, you've also touched on another important point, and it's this: when I say toxic male culture, I don't mean it's just men that buy into this or perpetuate this. Society does generally, and the toxicity is, you're meant to be strong, you're meant to be brave, you're meant to protect everyone else, you're meant to nurture, you're meant to take a concrete pill, and
Mm,
you're meant to never speak of this again. Or what are you, gay? Or
mm,
God, you're lucky if it was an older woman abusing you. God, you're lucky, mate. So you
mm,
can see how that toxic conditioning led to perhaps what you had experienced, and not no blame or shame on your wonderful family, your dad and uncle and all of that.
mm.
It's just how our conditioning was. What do
Yeah,
you
well,
think of that? Yeah.
yeah, well, like, the same thing goes for them. They don't know any better, all their
No.
male role models. We're talking early to mid '90s, I guess. It's still very much things like this, or even homosexuality, things like that, were not spoken about. It was a
No.
very different world to what we live in now.
Yeah.
And like, I'm all for being, like, my definition of tough now is very different to what it's been for most of my life,
Yes.
and there is an element, I think, in life, if you're going to get through it, you need to be tough and strong, and sometimes you need to be brave and courageous, and sometimes you just need to get on with things too, and get shit done. But you know like, there's so much more strength now that I've found working through that trauma, and then going, working through it enough, I guess, to speak about it, gives me so much more strength now than, like, most of my life I just buried that shit down as deep as it would go, and tried to forget about it, which was, interesting, because for long periods of time I did forget about it, and it wouldn't be I guess it always affects who you are as a person, how you come across to other people and do things in certain situations, but it would be buried back down there, and it would only be, if I got angry, or if I saw, the biggest ones for me were seeing something on the news about sexual abuse. Man, oh, I'd lose my shit. Internally, I'd just be raging, and um, it wasn't really until I grew up, and well into adulthood, I guess, that I went back and, worked through forgiveness, and worked through that trauma, and forgave myself, and tried to understand the whole situation again. That I got the power to speak about it, I guess, and got strength from it,
Yeah.
in a mental way. I think I used it for a long time in sport and in my career, to physically push through pain, and um, I always sort of looked back at it like I had quite a bit of anger. Um, Basically, since it happened, I always had the simmering anger, and that would come out once in a while, or if I was, fighting or playing footy or something, sometimes I'd call upon that. So, you know, in some ways, it was quite healthy to use it in a positive environment.
Yeah.
Could quite have easily gone into a negative environment in a few
Good
a
head.
few ways, and I've got a lot of understanding for the brothers and sisters out there that get in trouble with the law, or whatever it may be, because it's an outlet for it, and there's been a few moments in my life where that could have
Gone
gone
that
down that
way.
road. Mm,
Yeah, and that's really powerful as well, because I think it's got to come out somehow. And
mm,
for survivors watching, however it starts to emerge in you, it's just simply a sign that it needs to be there, and it's getting close to time to sharing your story.
Yeah.
A trusted loved one, or through a journal or therapist. There's many ways. You've touched on vulnerability, and I love it because I notice when people are vulnerable and share, it gives other people, believe it or not, it seems to give other people permission to be vulnerable as well. That's the true power, and that's the true strength, Kane, I
Yeah.
believe. I notice I presented last week at the International Mental Health Conference on the silence around this.
Yeah.
And I decided to do it differently and just speak from the heart and talk about a little of my story, but also what this is, the impact on us as survivors. Well, it just blew people out of the water because I was authentic, vulnerable, real, because the shame never belonged to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sometimes it worries me how much vulnerability or realness or honesty blows people away, because that's not the world we live in today. A lot of people, and I've been one of them, and sometimes I still am. We chuck that mask on and be who we think we need to be, or whatever it may be. And um, it is honestly, it's a superpower. If you can be, I think, first and foremost honest with yourself, and that's, I think, related to that burying shit. Sometimes you would put a mask over that, or try and tape it, shut the door on it. But
Yeah,
I think, accepting that it's a part of your story. I think that took me a long time, because I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be a survivor or a sexual abuse victim. So I didn't acknowledge it
yeah,
for for many years.
yeah,
Um, so I think that's, even just acknowledging that, as a male, that it's a part of who you are, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a negative part. I think I look back now, and I actually, probably about a year and a half ago, had the realization that all of my life I've wanted it. I wish it didn't happen. And I was like, fuck, if I could go back and not have that in my life, then I'd be so much better for it. But when I look back throughout my life and join the dots, it's actually a massive part of who I am, and I wouldn't be who I am and where I am and do what I do without it. So, as horrible as it sounds to say, I wouldn't change it, because
mm,
I know that who I am now, I'm so much more powerful because of it.
yes,
It was a hard thing to say the first time I said it,
yeah,
but it's, I guess we get a choice somewhere along the line to use it as a negative or a positive.
yeah.
And there's no judgment on my behalf, because I know how difficult it is. But man, if you can, acknowledge it, talk to people about it, and work through it, there is light at the end of the tunnel, I guess. And it can be like yourself, you're doing God's work, but you wouldn't have this without what you went through too. And it's like, the universe has a bit of a path for us, I guess. And yeah,
Yeah.
as hard as it is for a lot of us, whatever it may be, it's, I think
It's
it's
part
something.
of who we are. It's part of who
Yeah, it is.
we are, Kane. And I think, look, I'm with you. I believe I could never do what I'm doing now, or have
Mm,
the wisdom or the knowledge had I not gone through it. Do I wish it hadn't happened? Of course. There's no
mm,
survivor that would have wished any of
yeah.
that for themselves, including you. But the reality is, I would not be the person I am. I would not have the depth of understanding or compassion for survivors and
Mm,
be able to do this work. So you're 100% right. And I think the thing is, Kane, in a way, it's made you who you are. So you can
yeah.
look anyone in the eye now and talk about this. because it doesn't control you. You're in charge of it now. Do you see the difference?
That's it. That's it.
Where a lot of
That's
our
it.
beautiful survivor family watching, they're not quite there. So that's why people like your wonderful self speaking. If I
Yeah.
can bring people like you to the show, what happens is we get people all over the world going, oh my gosh, that made so much sense. Oh, I'm not so alone, you know?
Yeah. And it took, like I said, I sort of used it for sport a little bit. And I guess that was the first inkling for me that it could be that I could use it for good. Like it made me, especially with contact. Like I got into rugby, obviously, and all my life, but boxing was really where I learnt to use it, but also control it. And I think that was a really powerful moment for me. Knowing that I could bring out some of that pain and hurt, and in a legal way, it made me perform better in the ring. But also at moments in the ring, you need to suppress it again too. So you learned a little bit of control over my anger and temper and pain. And I guess the next step for that was doing the work up in the top 2 inches, I guess, to um, you know open up to myself about it. I sort of uh, put it like I put it in a bucket with a lid for so many years, and I sort of had to take that lid back off and let it out and let that roll around within myself, and not relive it, but understand, and start to forgive myself. I think was huge,
That's a
a
good
huge
thing.
part of that. But you can't do that if you just chuck it out, as deep down as you can and forget about it. It can't happen like that. So it's painful and it hurts and it takes time. When I look back now, the time it took me to do that was a long time. It took probably close to 20 years, 20ish years to let open the hatch and get it out. But um, looking back now, it's life changing. Like you said, compassion for other people and um, understand. Like I've got a whole different mentality when I look at people that are in prison, drug abusers, alcoholics, um, anything like that. I just think I understand now that they have a trauma, whatever it may be, that's coming out, and it's coming out in that fashion. So I've got a lot more understanding and compassion,
Yeah.
for that. But I wouldn't have had that at 20
No.
because I just didn't understand. I hadn't dealt with my own shit.
No. And I think, and you've raised another couple of things, I think that are really valuable as well. You're doing great, by the way. um, you've raised, when we talk about self-forgiveness, you see there's so many levels within that, because it might be
Mm,
self-forgiveness because maybe your body responded to the touch and it enjoyed it, or it could be self-forgiveness because maybe you felt you should have been able to say no or escape, or it could be self-forgiveness because you quite enjoyed his company and the attention apart from that. So there's
yeah,
lots of complex layers to this, and I guess for our survivors watching, it's different for all of us. There is no
yeah,
right or wrong. And there's a myth out there that you need to forgive in order to move on. No, you can't push it. When it's right for you, it will appear.
yeah.
Yeah.
And interesting, you talked about layers there too, because I've never, like, I have talked to a couple of counselors, but I've never really gone into it with them, and that's probably on my list over the next year or so is to actually, yeah, get a bit more layers to that. Because a couple of things you said, I was like, yeah, it's I've forgiven myself, but I think there's more to do too.
More work.
Yeah, yeah, it's still, there's more there to do. So I still occasionally think back and feel that guilt and shame and that sort of thing, and it's that internal struggle. So I think there's more layers to uncover there, and get someone on board that can guide me through that. I think will be is really important for me. I'm only halfway through my life, hopefully, so there's a long way to
Yeah.
go.
Well, you're actually doing quite well. The average age for an adult to speak out is 52.
Yeah,
So you're doing quite well. And I think too, when you consider it, there's so many variables to this. And I love what you've said
mm,
about, addictions. We haven't talked about suicide, but of course, suicidal
yeah,
ideation is huge in our country around this. You
yeah,
know, a child who is sexually abused becomes an adult who is 3 times more likely to take their own lives.
yep. 100% believe that.
And and yet, Kane, our prisons have over 65% of inmates who have experienced some form of child sexual abuse.
Mm,
Our rehab facilities, over 85% have people who have experienced some form of child sexual abuse. We have our over 70% of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD sufferers, are
yeah,
people like you and I. And
yeah,
yet, again, where's the noise around this?
yep. It's when you're saying that, like, that could just as easily have been me.
Yeah,
Like I had a good family around me. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich. We're just middle class workers. I had apart from that, I had a fairly good upbringing.
yeah,
But still, through my teenage years and as a young adult, I had moments where I could have really gone off the bloody rails. And in fact, I wanted to. And looking back now, I didn't understand why really, but that was a massive part of that. So it's absolutely no surprise that those stats are so high, and
yeah.
I guess that's one of the things I sort of growing up, and even as an adult, I've had a weird feeling that I would tell my story one day and help others, but I never ever had the courage or anything
It's
understanding.
huge.
Yeah, it's only been really the last 4 years doing something else and going into, I guess, social media and that sort of thing where I guess that was a push, I guess, for me to open up that little bit more and understand the stigma around it and try to speak to it, I guess, as much as I could. And but it's fucking hard. It's not an easy thing to do.
Oh, it's. Well, I tell non-survivors this, and tell me if you think I'm exaggerating, if you dare. I tell non-survivors this: for a survivor to speak out is a bit like abseiling off a cliff with no gear.
Yeah,
It's terrifying for us to
yeah,
find our voice. Yeah.
yeah. It is. It is. It truly is. It's because yeah, I don't even have the words to put into it, but really, but that's pretty close. Yeah,
Yeah. And they
yeah,
go, well, I think part of the reason for the silence, in my opinion, and be interested in your thoughts, Kane, it is this: survivors don't speak because we're so full of shame and guilt. When we do try to speak, we get shut down because good people don't know what to do with it or say. So
mm,
they'd rather perhaps we didn't talk. And then we get people who are the pedophiles or the abusers who rubbing their hands with glee because, of course, we're not speaking, which means they can go and find other victims.
mm,
But this evil exists, and New Zealand lead the world in this, Kane, unless you were unsure about that. We lead the world in this as we do with suicide.
yeah,
Um, that the point is this evil exists because people refuse to believe it exists.
yeah.
What do you think of that?
It wasn't until, like, for most of my life, I thought I was the only male victim in the world. I just thought this is not something that doesn't happen to males. The first person I told was a female at about the age of 18 or 19, and she opened up to me, and I was like, oh shit, me too, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Of quite similar stories. And it wasn't until probably, shit, I would say was 30 that I told another male. Um, and it probably wasn't until 33, 32, 33 that I found another male victim.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this happens to boys too. And it wasn't until probably 18 months ago that I actually Googled how many boys get sexually abused. And I was like, holy shit. When you think about your friend circle or your family, the males in your family, it's like, oh, odds are one of them's been abused too, or I'm the one. But like when you go into a room now of 20 guys and 20 females, it's like, fuck, a lot of them have probably been abused, and you just wouldn't know. Um, yeah, it's quite. It was. I was shocked when
Yeah.
I saw it. I think it's even like the females, like 1 in 3, I think it is, or something. It's shocking.
Well,
It's terrible.
you know that in our country, by the time a girl turns 16, one in three girls by the
Mm,
age of 16 will be, and 1 in 4, the help reported these stats last year. It says 1 in 6 boys, but the police tell me it's actually closer to 1 in 4.
yeah, and that's
So
that was a real big wake up call for me. I think that probably pushed me a little bit to speak on it because I was like,
yeah,
man, this was never talked about, like,
no,
ever. Not
no,
a not a not a single whisper of sexual abuse, in particular to males. I had a fair understanding that females copped it a bit, but certainly not at such young ages. And yeah, since I've spoken about it, I guess I've had other people come to me with their stories, and it's yeah, it is bloody shocking. It's horrendous.
Well, look, there's a few things. One is I run the charity called Hen in the Shame Back. We are not funded. The silence is deafening.
Mm,
Offshore, this podcast is now in 985 cities across the world.
yep, awesome.
So we're helping people. We just
Yep,
had a big global awareness day on Friday last week,
yep,
and we had people from all over the world joining us on our big walk. We've got the t-shirts with imaging and things, and the movement is growing, and it's led with love and light. But the point is, we're handing the shame back because it never belonged to us, and
yep.
we just got to help people. So if you come across any survivors that need help, please send them to our website. Resources are free.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's one of those things. It's a bit like, I guess, suicide and mental health was in the dark for a long time too, and over the last few years that is getting more light. I wouldn't say it's hasn't changed the statistics yet, but
No,
it definitely gives me comfort because I've had my own
don't
issues with
please.
that. But yeah, it definitely helps to be able to talk about it and feel comfortable,
Yeah,
and feel heard by people. I think is important. And like you spoke to earlier, it's a hard one. I've got up in front of a few audiences and talked about sexual abuse, and you often get that look of, yeah, people don't know what to say, what to think, or how to react. And it's probably very similar to someone putting their hand up and saying to a room, I've got depression. It's still a little bit misunderstood, or
yeah.
only the people probably that have been through it know how to act. And that's a difficult thing, because
But we've got to, I believe, Kane, I hear you, and I totally understand where you're coming from. My problem is that we lead the world,
mm,
and the silence is just ensuring the numbers are growing, they're not diminishing at
yeah,
all. So
yeah,
I think what I'm trying to do, and what the beautiful people behind Handing the Shame Back are trying to do, is to start to normalize these conversations,
yeah,
so that we can help children stop being abused. So
hundred
I
percent.
also released our global hand sign for under 16s. I bet you wish you'd had this.
Yeah.
That got released on
Oh,
Friday.
yeah.
I'll send
Yep.
you the link so you can put it on your social media.
Yep.
Can you
Yep.
imagine as an 8-year-old being able to do this?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And for someone to understand, yeah, like I look back and I didn't tell my parents until probably a year ago.
Do you
You
know
know,
why?
I didn't want them to feel guilty. Being a dad now, I was like, if God heaven forbid, but if my child came to me and it had already happened, you'd feel powerless, and I don't know, maybe it's because I've been a survivor, I would feel her pain or my boy's pain, and that I didn't want to put that pain onto my parents. Um, yeah, so that was a difficult one. That was a hard one. Um, yeah,
So
I just didn't. I didn't.
a gentle challenge to you around that though, Kane. How wonderful and what fantastic empathy you've got for your beautiful parents. But you need them.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
you needed them. So don't put yourself last all the time.
yeah. And like I think now, like if one of my kids got abused, I would want to know. You know,
Yeah.
but I didn't have that mentality, I guess, and I thought. Um, yeah, I thought I was saving them some pain by keeping it in. But they were really good when they found out, and they just wanted to know that I was okay. That was it. Sorry.
It's okay. I'm right beside you. You're doing great.
Yeah, I
The
just
yeah, you take a minute. I'll burble on about something.
that's cool.
So, listeners, it's a big thing, eh? There's lots and lots of layers to this, and we're very lucky to have Kane share because some of you will be going through similar things, and perhaps trying to protect a parent or an older person who was in charge of you at the time. The reality is, as Kane has just said, and I agree, I would much rather my kids told me as soon as they could because I'd want to be able to support them. So, what Kane possibly did just to make you feel better, Kane, was he robbed his parents of the
Yeah,
opportunity.
I did. I did.
Have
Yep.
I cheered you up now? Now I'm making you feel worse. But you what you did, my friend, was you robbed them because
Yep.
they then couldn't be there for you. But hey, again, timing is everything. And when it's right, you will speak. So there you go.
Yeah, that's it. And like I said, I would want to know if one of my kids went through it to support them, and I guess it took me having kids to probably understand that, and it probably took a few years still,
Yeah.
to understand. It wasn't until they got to that sort of age, but yeah, it's one of those things, that shame and guilt of it going through it. I think back, my brothers. I didn't want to tell them because I was ashamed, but like my mum is like the most beautiful, kind soul. Um, I can't figure out why I didn't tell her, to be honest. I don't know, but it is what it is.
We
It's
love
too
you, Kane's mum.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my dad's the same. He's a good man. But yeah, just going back to that shame, like handing the shame back. That's it.
Yeah.
I was the shame, but it wasn't mine to have. It's a beautiful, beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, and look, full ups to you and lots of love to you, Kane, because I think I'm hoping our survivor family watching will understand this. Team, there is no right way. The way that you choose is the right way for you. So I think for survivors everywhere, we've got to be kind, we've got to be compassionate, we've got to recognize what works for you won't work for me. What worked for Kane may work for you. There's no comparative, there's no best, there's no worst. we're just on a path that we weren't trained for, we weren't conditioned for, we weren't given any artillery, we had no understanding actually, because as children, we don't have the cognition. And Kane said much earlier in the interview, he didn't really even understand what was happening, except that it felt wrong initially. So please, can we give ourselves a big hug and some self-love? And actually, Kane, if you go to the website, my blog on having your own back is there, and I think you might
Yeah,
enjoy it. So,
yeah,
so
definitely.
team, perfect to have these issues raised, because Kane, you're just the gift that keeps on giving. FYI, you've also raised another point which I love, which is, you know, you've alluded to, gosh, you're still finding things. Me too. I think till the day we die, things will emerge in us. And that's okay, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Well, life's gonna throw shit at us forever, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
you get the good and the bad all the time. You don't get to choose what you get, more or less. So there's always things you can do if you want to. If you're in that space and you're ready to, there's always something you can work on in every aspect of life. And I've sort of treated that abuse a little bit the same, where there's always something more you can discover about yourself
Yeah.
yeah, it was really interesting. I think diving into my personality a bit, and understanding a little bit about why I am how I am, and how that relates to my trauma too. I think the more understanding you get around yourself as an individual, and trace it back to the things that have happened in your life, I think that gives you power too.
Yeah.
Um,
Like
you know,
connecting the dots, you mean?
yeah, yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, connecting the dots and understanding that I'm like this, or my personality, or I
Yeah.
do this in certain situations because of this. If you can make that link and understand it, you can, if it's a negative thing that's happening, you can take some of that power back when you understand it. And if it's a
Yeah.
positive thing, you can blow it up a bit more, and further it if you want to. So
Yeah.
there's always something. I don't know. I just think back now, and for a long time, you said it before, like we said something similar. Like, I thought it had ruined my life. I thought it had ruined me. I held that for a long time too, I think. But like I said earlier, I look back now, and I'm, you know, in a way, like, I wish it didn't happen, but I'm thankful for it making me who I am now, because I'm proud of myself now. And I think it's important for those that are going through something to understand that there is a bit of hope, and there is a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, that it, it won't define who you are or all about you. It's something that happened to you. It's an aspect of your life that can definitely creates who you are, but it doesn't have to be a negative. Um, yeah, it's not an
No.
easy road, but it can have some positives in the long run, if
Yeah.
you're willing and open to do the work.
100%. And I think that's a really useful way to look at it for our survivors, because there are some who are newly coming forward and quietly sharing their stories with friends, or have seen some of these interviews and think, oh, I'd like to learn a bit more. And I think sometimes just knowing that there's others of us out there who still struggle at times, or who don't have all the answers, gives us a little bit of comfort, because
Mm,
if everything's always perfect, then really, is it that
mhm.
mask you were talking about before, Kane? Is that then just come back on?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think this is a call to action for all of us as survivors, really. Let's expose our underbelly. Let's be kind to ourselves and others. No one thinks less of you, Kane, or Kane, you don't think less of me because I'm out there
Mm.
being interviewed and writing books and talking about this forever, you know?
Well, it's like I've always I guess I haven't talked to too many, sexual abuse survivors, and not many that speak like you do. But me watching you speak about it, it's powerful. I look at you and I see power and strength,
Yeah,
because you're owning it.
yeah,
And I guess internally, when I thought about myself speaking about it, I had that perspective of, oh, not sure about that, or people won't know how to react, or people will think differently of you and that sort of shit. But it's not until you see someone else speak of it that you think, oh, that's actually powerful. That's they're owning they're owning who they are, and you know using the negative things that happen to them for a positive for other people. That's so powerful. Like me watching you speak about it. So that's actually, you're giving me something right now, which
oh,
is which is cool. So I think that understanding that, yeah, until you perhaps see someone else speak about it, hopefully it gives you, they get the impression that it's a strength,
yeah,
and it hasn't, taken something away from them,
yeah. Well,
or
that's
not
it.
not everything away from them. Yeah.
No, but that's it, and I love what you've just said. So thank you. I'm going to take that as a beautiful compliment. Thank you.
Take it, mate. Yeah, that's what I see when I see you speak
Thank
anyway, is
you.
strength.
Thank you. So I addressed Rotary in Auckland 2 days ago, and because I need them to get behind this and share our hand signal, all of that.
Yeah.
We've got to start protecting our children. So I started with I was born into a family where I was trafficked, sex trafficked for 16 years. My grandmother groomed me and trained me and received a commission for it. And my father leased me to many outlets and gangs and
Mm.
groups. Now, Kane, you should, I'm not saying, I'm sorry, I've got to use humour because that's who I am.
Yeah.
You should have seen the faces.
Yeah.
But that's all I said. That's all I needed
Yeah.
to say about my story. But I'm trying to get people to sit up and take notice because
Yeah.
this is happening to our beautiful tamariki raratangi today. And
Yeah.
we've got 1 and 3, and not on my watch and not on your watch are we going to sit back.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a responsibility, and for survivors like you, Kane, who have done the work that you have and now can hold your head up high and stand in your truth.
Yeah.
You're giving permission, you see, for others.
Yeah.
So I guess what advice would you give to those survivors who are perhaps struggling with their stuff, or what helped you, I guess, that could help them?
Um, yeah, I think back to those times when I was struggling, and sport for me was a big one. Being
Yeah.
able to, just fuck, I was angry, deep down I was angry and hurt, and being able to, not everyone's into contact sport, obviously, but if you are into contact sport, it can come out in that, in most, in a legal way. But that was just a release. It was like a pressure valve, and it just took away some of that steam out of the anger. And I've always, I guess that's why I was attracted to boxing in the end. One was because I wanted to be able to protect myself so that it couldn't happen again. That was
Yes.
that was incredibly empowering for me. Like I had, after it happened, well, it was about the time when Mike Tyson was in his prime, and he was a bad dude, intimidating, scary, and just beating the brakes off everyone. And after I was abused, I felt weak and, you know, not masculine. And I saw Mike Tyson, I was like, man, I want to be like Mike Tyson because no one's going to touch him. So I had this sort of complex about me where I was like, I wanted to be him. I wanted to be intimidating. I wanted to be protected. Um, and luckily I had the opportunity to take up boxing. It was sort of, the opportunity was actually given to me, And I'm so thankful for that moment because I it was so empowering knowing that I could look after myself because I wasn't able to when I was young. And that gave me so much power and courage and bravery. And it let some of that anger out in a positive environment. You're encouraged to, be violent, I guess, within the rules. So I've got one of my dreams actually was to open a boxing gym once I found the sport because it taught me so much about life, and it is a sport that welcomes those people in that have been abused in whatever way, whatever sort of trauma. Um, so yeah, I'm incredibly thankful that I found that sport. I think if I didn't, I wouldn't be half the man I am now
Yeah.
because it was an outlet. Taught me a lot about myself, courage, vulnerability. When you get in a ring with one other person, you're on display, and if you haven't been doing the training, if you're not fit, that gets shown up. But also, if you're not brave, if you have weaknesses, they get shown for everyone. So it is an act of vulnerability, I think, to get in there with one other person and in a combat
Yeah.
sense.
So sports one thing, boxing's another. What else would you advise for maybe people that
Oh
kind
man,
of
like
what helped you, I guess? What advice could you give?
yeah, like later on in life, I wish I talked to people sooner. Um,
Oh, okay,
you
yeah.
know, it was when I was 18 or 19, and I told the first person who was a female about the same age, it was a relief. Just a
Yeah.
weight was lifted.
Lifted.
It didn't solve anything, but it felt comfortable and it felt good. And over the years, I guess I've told a few people, all females, but it was comforting to know that there are other people out there that have gone through it too. I think, I don't know, between the ages of 18 and 32, I probably told 7 or 8 people, and I think probably 5 or 6 of them had been abuse victims themselves. So that was really that really did help to know that I wasn't alone. There's nothing scarier than being in the dark and you're on your own. But if you got people that that are there with you, you don't necessarily have to hang out with them, but if you know that you're not the only one, someone else is going through it too. Um, I think that's really comforting
Yeah.
in tough times. And then you're talking about it and being brave enough, I guess, to open the box and start working through it. Um, you talked about timing before. I wish I was ready sooner, but it is what it is. But I think at the end of it, I'm actually excited to talk to professionals about it now and really work through it with some guidance.
Yeah.
A lot of the work I did was all on my own and figuring it out, sort of thing, and that's the hard way, I guess. But um, yeah,
Well, because you're talking about the younger version of you or trying to make sense of the younger version of you, and you can't because it's all coloured with your
yeah, yeah,
perception about it
yeah,
all. So it's
yeah.
almost impossible. Just as we're going into close, not that you're a chatty Kathy. Well, you are sort of. Is there anything you would like to say, Kane, that you haven't as yet?
um, no, I think I just want to reinforce that there's hope. Because yeah, I'm sure everyone that gets abused thinks that it's taken everything away from them and it's ruined their life. And I think, yeah,
There's hope.
there is hope that it can lead you down a positive path or a positive life, or you can still be what you want to be. It doesn't have to ruin your life.
No.
Easier said than done. I completely understand that, but yeah, I just if people are going through it, understand that there's hope. There are a lot of other people out there that will help. Everyone around you will help and be supportive. And that's something I didn't understand for a long time.
Yeah,
So you don't have to do it all alone.
I love that. We need to give a shout out to Todd Portsmouth, who was the amazing farmer that approached you and Kane. He was the
Yeah.
first guest I ever had on the show.
Oh, is that right? Oh,
18
yeah. No,
months ago.
he was one of the first males, I guess, that I actually remember him messaging me,
Yeah,
and he was quite open and honest about it, and I was like, wow, this
yeah.
is one of the first males I'd
He's
heard from. So
amazing.
massive, yeah, massive ups to him,
Yeah,
and what he's been through, and what he
yeah.
continues to do. Yeah, is
So,
huge.
yeah, amazing. Hey, so Kane, please stay right there. Don't sign off. Audience, how wonderful to have had Kane with us today, and so much wisdom actually, and insight into things. And I think what we covered was really actually useful, and I think you're going to be able to take away heaps, because I know I am. So there's a few things I'll just mention, I think, just to reinforce. Kane has said, if you can open the box and start to release some of what happened to you, he wishes he'd done it sooner. But if you feel you can start to do that, it might just free you like you wouldn't believe. So I think that's a really powerful thing to raise. And the other thing is on forgiveness. And Kane, thank you for this, because he was able to share with us about self-forgiveness, and it's not something we as survivors look at a lot. So I love that as well. So in the meantime, beautiful ones, as always, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.